see that there is a huge global who sets up some of these important guidelines and was born in 2007 was the Indian Council of Medical Research. Okay, so when was the first ethical guidelines laid by Indian Council of Medical Research? Any answer? Anybody has an answer? You're free to even Google. We are in the process of learning. Okay, today the mobile is open for you. Don't watch movies. The questions. Anybody like to answer the question what I raised? You're all with me? I'm asking too much questions. Google. When was the first ethical guidelines laid by ICMR, Indian Council of Medical Research, for those who want to practice ethics in India? Yeah? I think if I should give him a reward, he's been answering questions constantly. 1980? 80. Okay, let's see whether that's right. Okay, so the history of the national evolution, okay, 1980, okay, it is the ICMR which started drafting the ethical guidelines for, so I think I have some gifts. We'll start with the first gift to Sir. So please on the stage. So all the last benches, I have a lot of prizes. Please do interact. Fine. Thanks a lot. The time when I was starting my career as an undergraduate student. Okay, so we never knew what was ethics. And today, and that's the evolution. 1980, 2000. So constantly this ethics is evolving by a lot of practices which happens in biomedical science, in animal, in terms of human subjects, biomedical research. A lot of your experience are translated into the growth of these evolution. Okay? 1980, 2000, 2006. What next? What is the guideline we are following? One more question.
2006.
This time I'm not giving the prize to you. I want someone else. What is the latest biomedical human subject guidelines which we follow? What is the year? I just want the year. Okay?
2006.
Some number. 2014, 24. Yeah?
2006.
2006. Is already there. After that, there was one. What is the one which we are practicing now? Please, one hand up, then you should stand, then only I can give the prize. Yeah. 2020, that's the latest one. 23, it's come out. Okay, as of now, we practice 2000, yeah. Yeah, 2017. I'll give it to him. Because my discussion is going to be on 2017. Please come. Okay. So the guidelines which we are talking about, which is talking about biomedical health research involving human subjects, is going to revolve around 2017. And what I'm going to do is okay, so we talk in terms of 2017 guidelines, and today we are going to take a skinny dip into this. But I have about 200 slides. Okay, please don't sleep. Okay, fine. So this is the guidelines which we are going to go into today, superficially, not too deep. Okay, but it's very important if you want to do research. why do we go and present it to a committee, and why is the committee grilling us with a lot of questions? Not to put you into an embarrassed state, to tell you that this is what ICMR is laid a particular guideline, and please do follow that. Okay? So if your proposal is rejected, don't feel bad. You're learning more about what is this particular guidelines which is being laid. Okay? And you also have guidelines for biomedical research involving children. Okay, there is a set of guidelines, especially when we are talking about consent. Consent is a huge challenge. 4-year-old child, can you go and get consent and get the blood? There is a challenge over there. So there is a special guidelines which is being laid for biomedical thing involving children. And over a period of time, you can see different lines are being evolved. Stem cell is another area which some of you could be working. And what are the guidelines? And you can see the number of evolution it underwent in a short period of time. And today you have the latest one, which is talking about stem cell guidelines. And these are some of the latest ones which I picked up from the net yesterday. We have the Good Clinical Laboratory Practice 2021, and then you also have the GLP, and then you have the laboratory validation and testing. So all these guidelines are evolved for a number of purposes. Why? Because we want to fit ourselves into this guidelines of ethics. What are the key things which we have to look into? Participant safety, the protection of those people's information. A lot of these things go into some of these guidelines. And why do we require these guidelines? We have to harmonize ourselves with some of the guidelines laid by some of the international countries where they come out with certain set of rules. And if you want to bring those things into practice, and if you're collaborating, you talk about multi-centric projects, you have a guideline for that. Okay? You may collaborate from here with the US or Europe or in like Singapore or New Zealand, whatever it is. You have a set of guidelines which the government has laid. Why? Because people were selling samples from here. Take the blood sample over here from India and give it to someone in other countries. You have a set of guidelines which have been laid. You are not supposed to send the blood sample to other country without the permission of the government. Okay? So these are something which goes into some of these books. I was surprised to see this one. There's a guidelines how to publish an article. Okay? So it's a huge ocean by itself, and ICMR is constantly evolving, doing a lot of things by their own experience. And today we talk about multi-centric projects. Multi-centric projects also require some of these guidelines. It doesn't stop there. Today the buzzword is AI. Or you talk about meta-analysis. Most of you do a meta-analysis today. Okay? So there is a guidelines for meta-analysis. There is a guidelines for artificial intelligence when you're going to integrate it with bioscience. So all these things evolve, and these are something which is very important if you think that there is going to be a biomedical science component to it. Okay? So please do understand it, and all these documents are freely downloadable. You go to ICMR website, you can see all these documents which are there. And let's say you're designing a multi-centric project, or you're designing a meta-analysis. Please go through this, flip through this particular document. I know it is very dry. If I start talking about that, I'm sure all of you will start sleeping on during this particular session. But what you have to realize is everything is important. And if your research is going to be oriented towards biomedical science, if it's going to be oriented to stem cell, if it's going to involve animal, you have to plan your study in such a way that you get all the 3 ethical clearance. It's very important. If you go to the basic science, they will say, since your topic is involving stem cell, please also go to the stem cell committee and get an approval and come, because this committee is not competent to interpret what you are doing in terms of stem cells. So you have a separate guidelines for stem cells. and it's much more challenging to clear the stem cell committee. When you're talking about animal ethics, you have another important challenge. You talk about animal ethics. Okay, so all these things play a very important role, and you have to understand what your research requires. And you should also understand some of the basic things, like if you are going to involve meta-analysis or if you're going to publish your articles, there are a set of guidelines which is being promoted. And what you see over here is a focus is on biomed and human subjects. That's the key important buzzword which my talk will be looking into. So what is this guidelines going to talk about? It's going to talk about the public health, the social behavior which you want to study, the responsible conduct of research, and what is the research done in a humanitarian basis during emergency and disaster. Okay, we went through, the entire world went through COVID-19. There were a lot of things breached in ethics, and certain things were all accelerated in a faster pace. Okay, so these are something which revolves around this particular module which I've been discussing, 2017, on the biomedical science-related ethics involving human subject as participants. So this looks in terms of basic and ethical guidelines, something related to the basic component which is required. And what are the general principles? There are 12 different principles which we will be touching upon. And what we are looking in terms of, to protect the dignity, rights, safety and well-being of the research participants. Okay? Always remember, when you are going to collect a blood sample, it may be 3 ml of blood. Get into the shoes of the participant and see whether all these important components you are trying to protect for the participant. That is something which you have to learn. It is very important to understand that the guidelines are laid with the four important foundation principles. One is the autonomy, respect for the people, the beneficiaries, or what is the benefit that particular subject, and do no harm. That's the next important pillar which we have to understand. And there should be a level of justice. Okay, so these are some important things which has been pumped into this particular module. Okay, so autonomy talks about the principle of being a volunteer into this particular thing. You can't force somebody into that. Halfway through, a person would have given a consent, they will say, no, I'm dropping out of the study for several reasons. Okay, you have to be kind enough to let them go. So these are challenges which you will be facing when you go through some of these things. You have to respect the person and other important things which are being listed. So that's the first part which we are talking about. Autonomy and looking in terms of what is the benefits in terms of the subject, about the good actions which you do. Okay, sometimes you may tend, the subject would be very important to you and you have to convince them to get your consent through. Okay, so you should have the art and the skill to talk to them and tell what I'm doing is safe. You're going to take a small quantity of blood. You're going to do this particular technique. Don't talk science, talk about something in a layman's term so that the person understands what it is. That is an art which you have to learn through the process of research. And then, this is clearly defined, okay? So don't take, it says 3 ml, don't take 40 ml of blood, okay? So these are some things which can turn out to be deleterious, harmful, and these are something which you have to build over a period of time. Okay, most of these are self-explained, I'm not going to read out. So try to justify your work, convince the participants to be a part of your study, and then look in terms of some of these general ethical issues which have been put in the guidelines. Okay, so you can see a lot of these important things which can happen. There may be a collaborator in your same institution who is looking, at a particular thing in the same direction. Don't copy the idea or plagiarize the idea and then try to have a conflict. Okay, I'm just touching upon some important points which can happen as you go through a process of research. Okay, so plan your research, conduct your research in the most systematic way, and also make sure that you have some of these things well planned. Time is a factor. Sometimes when you go through the ethics, they meet only once in 3 months, 6 months, sometimes even in a year. Okay, like in our university, all the undergraduate, postgraduate, PhD projects, clinical trial, all of them go through a process of ethical clearance. Okay, and it's a huge task. We get about 1,500 to 1,800 applications in a given year. And it's a huge challenge. So what we did, we broke all the committees into subcommittees. Okay, so you have a core institutional ethics, and you have the IEC 1, which looks in terms of clinical trial. We have IEC 2, which talks about doctoral programs and projects, which is sent for extramural approval. So those grants go through IEC 2. It's fairly rigorous. Then we do have the stem cell committee. We do have the animal ethics committee. We also do have PG or dissertation committee, undergraduate dissertation committee. So all of this requires time. Sometimes we are given 6 months to do the project, and by the time you have to get the ethical clearance, it would be 3. You miss the bus, it becomes 6 months. Okay? So you have to plan your work, understanding this, the process, and trying to look in terms of some of these important factors. Okay? So what we are talking about, the groups which we are trying to study. We work with the adult group. Fine, so it is more easy to convince. You have group, a subject who would be pregnant. Are you having the rights to collect the blood? If so, the committee requires suitable documentation that you can collect sample. If you are looking at a pediatric group, you have to have a process of consent in a proper shape. And lots more. Okay, so you learn over a period of time, as and when you get into that particular stream of research, you have to understand that there are a lot of challenges, especially when you're talking about clinical trial. It's not so simple. One, designing a clinical trial, then you have to have a doctor into this particular entire system, and a particular drug is being tested, and the whole process goes through very rigorous. You have to terminate it. Anything which is having an adverse effect has to be reported. And it's also very important that when you do a PhD work, you finish your work, you have to give a summary to the ethical committee which gave you the permission to do the work. Most of us don't do that. Okay? The ethics committee is always busy, so they may forget. But it's your duty to go and tell that I've done with my work. These are my findings. Please put this particular document into your records. Okay, so these are something which you have to imbibe yourself and tell that you are proved to be ethical in what you are doing. It's your mindset. Okay? So if you are cheating the whole system, you should be ashamed of what you are doing. Okay? So try to build this career of ethics. Have a checklist. Like ICMR talks about what is the checklist for whatever research projects we are talking about. Trying to follow some of these guidelines in a very systematic way. Okay? Especially when you're talking about clinical trial, you have to register with CTR. Okay? Clinical Trial Registry of India. And this is very strictly monitored by the pharmacologist and the pharmacist. They basically try to decipher the side effect of a particular drug. Anything, any adverse effect, it gets pumped there. Anybody can cross-verify that. These are something which we have to learn. You can hide it, okay? But it is also very important that you understand this particular. So what does this particular guideline talk about? It talks about risk versus benefit. You have to weigh yourself what is the risk and what is the benefit one has to undergo in terms of doing this particular If your risk is going to be greater than the benefit, I think it's not worth doing that particular research. Okay? So these are something which you have to talk about. And when you're talking about a thing where we are looking in terms of a social study or whatever it is, that also does do have a process of ethics. Okay? We talk about genetic research, we talk about data analytics, we talk about various steps in terms of, today we are talking about AI involvement, the data analytics, design and lots more. Most of these things have to go through the process. You have to convince the entire family or the study participant to undergo a process of convincing them to give their sample for the study. Okay? So once we have that, we also talk about storage of samples. Fine? So we store samples, and quite often we really don't know how long to store the samples. So the first question the ethics committee asks is, how long are you going to store the sample? And who is going to continue work? These are some questions which would be okay, and somebody becomes responsible for those particular things. And there are a lot of emergency. COVID was a scenario where we talked about emergency, and this guideline talks about some of these important factors in all these things. Okay, so this is the reference book. It is freely downloadable. You can download it, you can go through it, and you'll be able to understand a lot of things. Okay. So I'm trying to reinforce what I've been telling. I just showed something pictorially. Let's make it right. Okay? So these are the 12 important principles which the guideline talks about. Okay? It has a general statement. It talks about ethical issues, what is responsible conduct of research, ethical review procedures, clinical trial, public health. All these I've just shown you as some of these pictures which you saw. Okay, so this guideline has this 12 important components. Okay, so I'm just trying to reinforce with some wording. I just picked up some excerpt from the guidelines, and you can see that this is the general statement. What is the general statement which you have to remember? Every research has an inherited risk. Do you all agree? This can happen anywhere. Okay? So you have to assume that if it's not having also, we should assume that it has a risk. We really don't know where the risk will come. It will come at the time of publication. Conflict of interest, a lot of things can happen during that time. Do you all agree? How many of you have published articles where you had conflicts with your friends? So general ethical. Fine? And these are some things which talks with the general ethical issues. Okay? We talk about the conflict of interest and all those things are packed into this particular and trying to be responsible in trying to conduct a particular research. Is in terms of when you want to do a particular thing, you can't just simply force a person. I'm giving you an example. You can't force a person and you tell that I'm going to put thing, and if they are not willing to do so, you should let them go. Again, go and convince them, coach them, and then the patient would have already been under a lot of stress. Okay? And yeah, it's just a matter of 3 ml of blood, but it makes a huge difference. And the misconduct can be in multiple directions. Okay? Talking about publications, this is a separate guidelines have been laid by the ICMR now. We are talking about the International Committee Medical Journal Editor Guideline, and that has been incorporated. And today we are talking about a lot of things. We are talking about gift and ghost authors, a lot of things which is debatable. Okay, so these are some things which you have to learn over a period of time and have the sense to realize that this is what goes into a particular article. Okay, then you have the plagiarism. And today we have softwares which keeps monitoring some of these things. So you learn these things over a period of time, and you have a review process. There's a committee which will sit and review that process, and they basically try to balance the well-being of the participants, which is who are going to be a part of your study. And sometimes the committee has to be really stern and severe, basically because sometimes when you deviate, we try to convince you that you bring these changes that would be a better way to approach the project. Okay, so you have process where you try to review the committee sits. There are different aspects which goes when you are talking about multi-institutional. You have to get multiple ethical clearance and the site monitoring. So an approval of a particular institution is also very important. You can't have a committee in an institution. So there is a team of a set of people who come and visit and say, okay, you can certify some of these projects. Okay? And you also have various types of reviews. Some doesn't require ethical guidelines. Okay, you're sitting and doing bioinformatic work, and it was just data analytics. So you don't have to go through a rigorous process. But can I share that information with someone sitting in US or in Russia to do the work for me? I have to have a process by which I share my information with some other country. So you have an exception review, expedited review, a full review. Okay? And some of the things like clinical trial goes through the full committee, thorough, rigorous screening is being done, and the set of members in the committee also varies in terms of that. So it came out of it. Fine. So the process may take a lot of time. Okay, I told you 3 months, 6 months. If you're planning your scale, in planning your work for a master's or a doctoral work, you have to include the time for clearing your ethics also. Okay, and then archiving data. Okay, so the committee will take your proposal digitally as well as in a hard copy, and they put it, they archive the particular data. How long can we store this particular document? For at least 3 years. And then when are we going to destroy these documents? It takes its own period of time. So ICMR guidelines talk about how long we should store a particular document. Once the study is done, questionnaire for which also you have to get a consent. Okay, I can use a questionnaire among students, and the teacher may be throwing the questionnaire for his or her work. And suppose no, we are not participating, then I'll minus 10 marks. That can also happen. Okay, or you're afraid that the teacher would penalize you and you will give a false consent to be a part of the study. So anything can happen. It can be a simple tool which will capture some information, or it can go to a level of collecting blood or a biopsy or a lot more. So a lot of things go into it. So you have written consent, you also have oral consent, and then when you're talking about drug trials, you have a process of schedule, certain schedules which you have to document. And then we are talking about certain things which go into this particular documentation process. Okay, so you can also have a waiver of consent. Okay, sometimes and there is a right for the committee members to take a decision whether they can give a waiver of consent for some of the studies. And the age groups which we are talking about, I'm not going into the depth of some of these things, I'm just touching it superficially. One is in terms of a legal authorized representative, especially when you're talking about children who don't understand what you say. You can easily convince them by giving a chocolate like what I did and get a consent from the child. Okay, but you have to have an authorized person or the parent giving the consent. And sometimes if the child can understand what it is, then you can have an oral assent and then get a consent from the parents. So these are some things which go into the organization of all those 12 principles which we are talking about. Okay, and some of the important things like involving children, involving pregnant ladies, old people. These are groups falling under the vulnerable category where they can be misused for the study purpose. Okay, so all these things are packed into this particular guideline which we are talking about, ICMR 2017 as of now. And this particular guideline also talks in terms of using this particular thing for public health studies. Epidemiology, it can be a huge population study. And sometimes when you're talking about public health and certain other things like environmental factors, pollution, all these things may also involve public health kind of research. And you also have social behavioral studies, which is one of the important principles which is being listed by the ICMR. Okay, so all these things go into this particular package. We also have talked in terms of human genetic testing and research. So there are some another important things where a lot of things can go haywire. Manipulations can be done. So the committee is very responsible to understand the entire process. Why do we ask the protocol? Is to understand what you're going to do. You do a self-declaration in advance telling that this is what I'm going to do. If I'm going to do a change in my protocol, I'm going to deviate to a great extent, I have to inform the ethics committee that I'm deviating from the protocol, and nobody is going to say no. They'll be happy to hear from you that you're documenting the change in your process. Definitely the process will change. And storing of biological material is another important thing. How long are we going to store? And what is the process? What is the guideline? What is the documentation process? And some of the institutions talk about the biobanking and biorepository, which is a huge gold mine. Definitely, as a student who's doing research, you think every drop of blood is very important. You don't want to discard it. And always you buy hundreds of deep freezers, it is always good. Because we know it is a real important gold mine. But do you have a mechanism of discarding it? Do you have a mechanism of how we are going to reprocess and repurpose some of these samples is something which you have to define. There should be a system in place for each organization. Okay, so that's what the guidelines talk about. We're talking about the process and how it should be. And then when you're talking about disaster and other things, that's the final 12th point which has been highlighted, which talks in terms of the response and how we deviate from some of these guidelines which we have. So the last part of my talk would talk about what is the 12 principles we saw. Who's going to practice this? It's you and me. Okay? The principal investigator of the project. One day each one of you will have a project. So I'd like to wish you all the very best. And the sponsors should know. The institutional ethical committee members, some of you would sit in the chair of the ethics committee. You should know what is the guideline laid by the government of India. And it's so dynamic. The last time when I read and yesterday I was sitting and going through it, so much things have evolved over a period of time. Okay? So you have to be constantly updating the knowledge, and that's why this kind of forums have been organized periodically. And then you have the institute and the CROs should also look in terms of practicing this 12 principles which has been laid by that particular guideline. Stem cell is totally different. Animal is totally different. For this particular purpose, you have to follow this. Okay? So what you see over here is what is the composition of the ethics committee. Okay? You have to have well-trained personnel to understand and speak the language, harmonize what we speak. And then you have to have multidisciplinary specializations. You should also have adequate representative of age and gender. 50% of the members should be outside the organization so that there is no bias in clearing the proposals, and then you have a minimum of 7 to 15 members. And when you want to convene a meeting, if you have only 4 members, that quorum is not met and the meeting is dissolved. Okay, so these are something which is a challenge to go through a process of thing. It has a chairman, member secretary. So the chairman is always outside the organization, member secretary who coordinates and does most of the job, getting every document into place. Then you may have a basic medical scientist, clinician, legal expert is a mandate. And then you have social scientists, philosophers, layperson. All these form the composition of a particular government. Okay? So I wanted to touch upon some of these things. What is the role of the chairman? Basically, he has to bring some of these things into place. And the member secretary is the key person who documents most of these things. And you also have a very key important role in organizing the. So you have the constitution over here. And what do they do? What are they looking at? They're looking at proposals. They're looking in terms of biomedical research proposals, social, and each committee has its own limit. Sometimes it's a kind of a joint committee, but now it is slowly differentiating into bioscience, stem cell, animal, and so forth. Okay? So each one of it will have its own time required, it has its own timeline and lots. Okay? So the ethical committee is entrusted with some of these important roles which is being described over here. Okay? And what we see over here is they look for some of these documents, informed consent, whether it's written right, and always you have to have a mother tongue, the common thing over a thing, and sometimes you do a Google translation which doesn't make any sense. So always we tell them, no, this is not the right explanation in the language which you have written. And all those things go into, the committee keeps modifying, giving you suggestions, guidelines, and a lot of these things which they try to streamline. Okay? So it's your responsibility to understand that it's not a simple task. Everybody is busy with their own work. You are doing your project for your own benefit and own satisfaction. And basically what you have to do is be a responsible, ethical person. Trying to furnish as and when you amend or change or bring about a kind of a closure of a particular project, deviating from it, whatever it is, it's your responsibility to tell your ethics committee that you have done that. And it is very important that you realize that some of these things, and when you're talking about funding and all those things, when you strictly abide with this thing, you become visible by the funding agency. They pump in a lot of money to you, lots more. And it can be the other way also. There's a lot of violations which can happen. Okay, so don't get into those aspects of violations. So these are something which you have to learn, and it comes over a period of time. Okay, and this is a very challenging topic which Arvind gave it to me, and he said, somehow get the attention of the students. Hopefully I got your attention, and hopefully you didn't sleep. I know it's first hour, but you all didn't sleep. But I just want you to remember the last 2 slides. What are the last 2 slides? We're talking about the numerous benefit you go through. Okay? Vice versa, the subject also gets a lot of benefits out of that. And don't get into trouble. These are the 2 take-home messages which I like to let you all know. And I like to take a few questions. Please stop me. Questions are permitted, sir?
Yes, sir.
Fine. The first person who's throwing a question gets a reward. Ask some question. What's my name? Yeah. So first come to the stage. I'll give you the reward for cornering me with the question.
Raised by You wanted to ask something or you used it by default? Come.
Please come. That is what.
Even if you don't ask the question, I'll give you the prize. All man stage man.
Somebody.
So about 30 years back, when I was sitting there, I was also on this campus.
Yeah.
I never used to come up.
Okay.
So I'll ask you a question. Tell me something. பேர் சரி சொல்லுங்க பேர் என் பேர் சொல்லுங்க உங்க பேர் He's very attentive, he knows my name. Right. Tell me something about yourself. Your name. Yeah. He will introduce himself. Sattma in mic Am I audible? Yeah, fine. I'll make question.
My name is Nikhil.
Yeah, fine. What else? What are you doing?
Currently doing MSc Microbiology.
Great.
Sorry, couldn't hear.
Second MSc Microbiology. Am I right? From which institute? Yeah, IBM. Great. So I want you to grow up in your career, be a good biomedical scientist, and also follow ethics. Okay? All the best. Any other questions? No questions?
Ethics, any questions?
Yeah, please go ahead. I'll give you a reward.
Who's having the mic?
You can come to the stage so that I can give the reward also. Keep asking and keep walking. Then walk the talk.
Sir, can you shed some limelight on the ethics regarding the handling of model organisms and euthanasia?
Like, can you give me an example? Microorganisms or
No, sir.
small animal?
Small animals like rats, mice.
Okay. Can you say the first part of the question?
Regarding the ethics handling the organism and also regarding the euthanization of organisms.
Okay. So the animal ethics is separate process guides. Okay. So you have the CPCS guidelines which talk one particular process. You have a set of animals which is being science. So the animal ethics expert from said that you ask 100 animals, they will be. So they will decide group 1.